Hey guys, how's it going? This is the last video of the month, which means it is going to be my Book of the Month review. If you don't know what I'm talking about, every month I pick my favorite book that I read from that month and I do a review on it. I'm going to link the playlist if you want to see the other ones, but today's book is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I loved this book so much, and let's just get into it. Now, this is the first book in the Mistborn series. It just says Mistborn on the cover, but official title is The Final Empire. So whatever you want to call it, I loved it. I did read the second book and I absolutely adored that one too, but I couldn't review the sequel without spoiling this one, so I just thought that I'm going to review this one because I loved them both. And of course, as always, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't read the books yet, don't worry, I won't give anything away. A quick summary if you haven't heard of this book before. We all know the old fantasy cliche of there's a prophecy of the chosen one who's going to save the world, blah blah blah. This book is 1,000 years after that hero has failed. The world is dark and chaotic, ruled over by a god-type guy with crazy powers called the Lord Ruler. Our main character is a street urchin, part of a thieving crew. She's part of the race that is oppressed, and basically, it's just her trying to survive in this horrible, horrible world. She gets discovered by a man named Kelsier who tells her that, like himself, she is a Mistborn, someone with a lot of magical powers. He takes her under his wing and trains her, and she ends up joining his little crew while they try to start the revolution and take down the Empire. First of all, I just thought that concept sounded so cool. It's taking a cliche and a trope that we all know and I personally love, but kind of turning it on its head and just kind of seeing what happens there and where things go. I thought it was really well done. A lot of different things were explored and I just thought it was really cool. This book really didn't feel predictable at all, and even some like very minor twists were just like surprising. Like the actual like main plot twist definitely took me by surprise, but there were so many just little things thrown about that I was just like had to stop and be like, wow, I didn't actually expect that to happen. And there's a lot of kind of false leads going on, so you don't really know which one you're supposed to follow and which one's the distraction, and I don't know. I just thought it was very, very well done. I was really gripped by it the whole way through. I was even invested in the romantic subplot, which I'm not a romance person. I usually just couldn't care less, but this one, because there was like an extra something added to it, I was really invested in it and just really curious to see how it turned out, and there was just enough of an air of mystery that even if you're someone like myself who doesn't really care about romance, there's still something for you to kind of really get into. My one very, very minor complaint, I found the magic system really confusing at first. It's definitely unique, I've never read anything like it before, but basically there's a handful of different powers that are all tied to a specific metal. Not everybody has magic. The people that do, they can either control one metal or all of them. There isn't really an in-between. And if you can control all of them, you are what's known as a Mistborn, and you're cool and powerful. I thought that this was super cool, but it was a little bit hard to kind of keep track of everything. So basically, you would consume the metal, usually in some sort of concoction or a dust or something, and then you like burn it internally and you get the power. But I did find it hard to keep track of which metals did which power, and they're pretty much all paired up. Like there's one that lets you push on metals, and there's one that lets you pull metals, and there's one that kind of enhances all of your like senses and stuff, and then the other one enhances all your like internal things like your strength and everything. And it was just really hard to keep track of it in my head, and I think it's just because it's something that's so unique, I didn't really have anything to base it off of. But there is a quick reference chart here, and there's no spoilers in this section, so you don't have to worry about that, but it just says the metal, so for example iron, effect, pulls on nearby metals. Misting title, misting is the people that can only control one metal, and they're called a lurcher. So little things like that. I did find it a little bit confusing in the beginning, but I found that reference super helpful, and as I kind of continued on, a lot of it just I understood better and I just kind of got used to it. On the flip side of that, it was a little bit repetitive in some parts, but I did find that to be a good thing. Like for example, near the beginning, almost every time that they called somebody by their like misting title, they also said what metal was associated with it and their power. So I feel like if you get it right away, that might feel a little bit redundant, but for me it really, really helped me kind of understand it and really like nailed it into my brain. So I definitely didn't have a problem with it, but some people might. But aside from that, I just found the world really, really easy to understand. It was just built so perfectly, and of course never felt like info dumpy. Even like the way like the politics and the lifestyle were kind of woven in to the characters' actions and their perceptions. It really gave you a really good feel for how the world works, how these people live, and I really felt connected to it. For a fantasy series, I think that is so important because it's a world that isn't our own, and if we don't get enough world building, you know, we'll fill in the blanks ourselves or think it's too much like this world or whatever, and that it can definitely take away from things, but I feel like it was built slowly enough but strongly enough that I never got confused, and it always felt really real to me. And even things like the physical world, like, this won't give anything away. So basically the sky is red and it's always raining ash, and all the plants are brown and everything's kind of half dead, but there's like rumors that back, you know, long 1,000 years ago, plants used to be green. And just like the way that they say it is brought up really organically, organically, plants, is brought up really naturally, nature. It's when Kelsier is talking about kind of why he wants to overthrow the Lord Ruler and bring back the world of old, and obviously, you know, the world is a horrible place and everything, so no one questions it, but he even is talking about, you know, how he wants to bring it back to how it was over 1,000 years ago when plants used to be green, and everyone thinks he's crazy because they're like, well, why would plants be green? Like, and also, why green? That's such a random color. And they don't understand it, and it's not overplayed, so it doesn't seem like it's laying it on thick or annoying or anything like that. But it's just the little things that are brought up really naturally and that really kind of get you to picture the world. Because sometimes in fantasy worlds especially, they'll mention, oh, the trees look like this in this world, and they just mention it once and then you just move on with your life. And you know, some details just don't stick because not everything you read sticks in your brain for most people. But because they're just so like subtly like interacting with everything and just the casual way they bring it up in conversation, you really remember like, oh yeah, I can picture that, it's real in my head. Like they always talk about how everything's dirty and how there's people that are just employed to scrub rich people's houses all day, every day because of all the ash that falls. And it's brought up enough that it's really like in your head and really understood without being too overdone. So for world building, I would say not only is it really, really well done and grand scale and everything, but it's also explained in such a perfect way that I definitely think it was a really strong suit for this novel. If I had to pick what the strongest part of this book was, for me personally, it was characters, specifically the character development and their relationship with each other. I loved all of the characters, even the ones that were kind of jerks, and even the side characters were really well developed enough that I understood everything that they did, and every character just had such a like unique voice to them, and just like they all had their own mannerisms, they all had their own, I don't know, they just all felt like really real people. And honestly, at the end of the book, I think if you would have stopped like naming what characters did what and just said he did this, she did this, blah blah, I think I would still be able to follow it really well, just because of how well the characters were evolved and just how well-rounded and real they were. And also, I felt like every character got character development. Even the more minor characters, there's a really noticeable change from the starting of the book to the end of the book, and even if it's not a big deal, like if a minor character, you can still feel the fact that they grew. And also even just the way they interacted with each other, whether it's the friendships, dislike, anything like that, it all felt very real and very natural and organic, and I really, really liked that. But even though I feel like I knew the characters really, really well, they still managed to surprise me sometimes. One other downside that I forgot to mention is there's one character, his name is Mistborn. They end up calling him Spook later on. I'm gonna call him Spook. He has a very, very unique dialect. I'm gonna give you an example. Okay, I'm gonna read out this part and there's no spoilers in it. Marsh, Vin whispered beneath the general hum of the room. Is that a nickname? Nodding without the call of his parents. Vin paused, trying to decipher the boy's eastern dialect. Not a nickname then? Mistborn shook his head. He wasn't one though. What was it? Iron Eyes. Others stopped using it. 2 crawling close to an iron in the real eyes. A. Inquisitor. So you can still understand exactly what he's saying, but it almost just feels unnecessary. At first it was kind of cool, but it kind of became distracting as it went on, and the thing that I don't like is there's literally no other characters that talk like that. Like, they mention that it's a specific Eastern dialect of where he's from. I think they say it's like a street dialect, like a lot of street slang, but no one else talks like that, and I finished the second book. No one else talks like that in that book either. Maybe it comes into play in the third, maybe, but I don't know. It was kind of an interesting way to develop the character, I guess, and just kind of give him an extra character trait, but it was just a little bit too much, I think, personally. One very minor thing that I really liked is that almost all of the names are extremely easy to pronounce. That's one of my least favorite things about fantasy, is sometimes they just have the weirdest names, and I love a book and I want to talk about it with people, but I don't know how to pronounce any of the names, so sometimes I'll avoid talking about it. Like, The Wheel of Time. I love that series. My dad read that series, and sometimes we'll talk about it, but we'll say a character's name and we'll have no idea who in the world the other one is talking about, because the pronunciation is just so different, because so many of the names are completely unlike any words I've ever heard of. But with this one, all of the names were really easy. The only exceptions is Kelsier's name. I wasn't positive how to pronounce it. There's one character, I say Sazed, it might be Sazed, I don't know. I pronounce it Sazed, and I think it's close enough that if I said it and I was wrong, people would still know who I was talking about. The other one is, his name is Eland, and I don't know if it's Eland or Elland. At one point they refer to him as L for short, so that makes me think that it's Elland, but in my head I always say Eland. But again, you'll still know who I'm talking about. And Lester Bornez is a real name, but they give him a nickname early on, so it's not that bad. Anyways, I know that that's a really minor thing for most people, but it was just a little thing that I really appreciated. So overall, I rated this book a 9 out of 10. Like I said, the minor issues I had with it were so small that it really wasn't a problem, and there was so much good about it that it way more than made up for it. If you like fantasy, I would definitely recommend this book. I will say though, I've read the sequel. I'm just starting the third one, so I can't really say anything about that one yet. I loved the sequel, but it's a very different feel than this one. You know, this one is kind of like a action-y, like heist type feel to it, and the sequel is much slower paced. It's more political focused. So don't go into the sequel expecting the same thing from the first, but I just gotta say, the sequel's ending, I'm not over it. I'm not over it. It was so mind-blowing. Like, I really loved the ending of this one too, and it was unexpected, and it was really cool, and I really liked it. But the sequel, like the last like 50, maybe 100 pages or so, I was just like reading with my mouth wide open, and I just couldn't, like, oh, so good. Like, if you don't like political themed books, skim the first 3/4 of the book and then just read the ending, because it's worth it. But if you don't like books like that, the ending of this one really wasn't much of a cliffhanger. Like, you can very clearly see that there is going to be another book, but if you have zero interest in the next book, you can walk away at the end of this book if you don't want to. I don't think you should, but you can. So I would say that you can read just the first book on its own, but if you read the second book, you're going to have to read the third. Like I said, 9 out of 10, I loved it, highly recommend. If you've read this book, feel free to comment down below, because I just want to talk about it with people, and my dad is usually the one that I rant to books about, but he hasn't read this series yet, and I just feel like I'm gonna blow up. I might actually blow up. You can also talk to me on Twitter, because I have Twitter now, and not that many friends yet. And that's all I have for today, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the like button so I know, and feel free to subscribe. I make new videos every Wednesday and Saturday, usually reading and writing related, and my last video of the month is always a book review. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I see you next time, and until then, have a great day. Bye!